Somewhere in Wales, 140 miles from a quiet field in southern England, there is a hole in the ground where a 5-ton stone used to sit. Archaeologists found it in 2015. It proves that human beings, using nothing but fire, wooden wedges, and raw determination, pulled a boulder out of a hillside and started walking it toward Stonehenge. No one has ever fully explained why they carried it so far when suitable stone sat much closer. That single hole is one of the strangest, best documented facts in all of archaeology, and it's just the beginning of what makes Stonehenge genuinely mysterious. No invented AI required. Stonehenge stands on Salisbury Plain, about 90 miles southwest of London, and it has been confusing people for at least 800 years. 12th century writers blamed wizards. 17th century antiquarians blamed druids. Victorian scholars blamed Romans. Today, after more than a century of careful excavation, radiocarbon dating, and geological analysis, we finally know a great deal about how it was built. What we still don't fully know, what nobody has ever fully known, is why. And that gap between what the evidence proves and what it can't explain is where the real mystery lives. The monument itself is smaller than most people expect when they see it in person. The outer ring is made of massive sarsen stones, a hard sandstone, some standing over 13 feet tall and weighing around 25 tons apiece. Originally, many of these uprights were capped with horizontal stone lintels, fitted using woodworking joints, mortise and tenon joints, the same basic technique you'd use to build a wooden table, carved into solid rock. Inside that outer ring sits a second circle of smaller bluestones, each weighing 2 to 4 tons. And it's the bluestones, not the giant sarsens, that hold the strangest part of the story. For decades, geologists agreed the bluestones came from the Preseli Hills in West Wales, specific outcrops that can be matched to the stones at Stonehenge, almost like fingerprints, based on their unique mineral composition. That's roughly 140 miles away. There is no reasonable explanation for why Neolithic Britain would go to that kind of effort unless the stones themselves mattered, not just as building material, but as objects with meaning, possibly carried from a place that was already sacred before Stonehenge existed at all. In 2015 and again in the years after, teams led by archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson identified actual quarry sites in the Preseli Hills, complete with stone wedges left in the rock and a loading platform that appears designed for hauling stones away. That discovery didn't answer the biggest question: how they moved 5-ton boulders 140 miles without wheels or draft animals suited to the terrain. But it proved, beyond doubt, that people did it deliberately, by hand, on purpose. Then in 2024, the story got even stranger. Researchers analyzing the altar stone, the large flat stone lying at the center of the monument, long assumed to be Welsh like its neighbors, found that its mineral signature didn't match Wales at all. It matched northeast Scotland, more than 450 miles away. If that finding holds up, and so far it has, it means Neolithic Britain moved a 6-ton stone across nearly the entire length of the island, through territory controlled by different, distant communities, at a time when we're often told these societies had no large-scale cooperation or transport network. Either there was far more contact and coordination across ancient Britain than we ever assumed, or something about the stone itself justified an effort that, on paper, looks almost irrational. The sarsens tell a different but equally strange story. For over a century, everyone assumed they came from the Marlborough Downs, about 20 miles north. But in 2020, a chemical analysis of a stone core drilled from Stonehenge decades earlier, and quietly kept in someone's private collection until it resurfaced, allowed researchers to trace the exact origin. Most of the sarsens came from a specific site called West Woods, about 15 miles away. 15 miles doesn't sound as dramatic as 140, but transporting stones weighing as much as 6 African elephants over hilly terrain, using only timber, rope, and human labor, remains a genuine feat of engineering that experimental archaeologists have spent years trying to fully replicate. So how did they actually move them? This is where a lot of documentaries get sloppy. So let's be precise about what we actually know versus what's still debated. Experimental archaeology, actual physical tests, not computer models, has shown that large groups of people using timber sledges, log rollers, and grease tracks can move stones of this size, especially downhill or on prepared surfaces. A famous 1990s experiment demonstrated that around anywhere from 20 to 200 people, depending on terrain, could move a comparably sized stone using Neolithic-appropriate technology. It's grueling, it's slow, and it requires serious organization, timing, food supply, injury management, leadership, but it is not physically impossible, and it does not require lost technology or outside help. What it does require is something almost more impressive than a mystery. Proof that Neolithic Britain could organize large numbers of people toward a shared, long-term project. That, on its own, tells us these communities were far more socially complex than the word primitive ever suggested. Once the stones arrived, raising them involved digging holes with sloped sides, called sockets, and using timber A-frames, ropes, and again manpower, to walk the base of a stone into position and lever it upright, packing the socket with rubble and chalk to lock it in place. The lintels on top were likely raised using timber platforms built up in stages, similar to how you'd construct scaffolding, sliding or levering the horizontal stones into place at height. It's laborious, it's clever, and crucially, none of it requires machinery that hasn't been found, tools that don't exist, or knowledge we can't account for. What it does require is patience, planning, and generations of continuity. A community willing to keep working on something that outlived individual lifetimes. That continuity shows up clearly in the archaeological timeline. Stonehenge wasn't built in one go. It developed in phases across roughly 1,500 years, starting around 3000 BC. The earliest phase was a simple circular ditch and bank, with 56 pits arranged just inside it, the Aubrey holes, named after the 17th century antiquarian John Aubrey, who first identified them. For a long time, their purpose was genuinely unclear, and it's a fair mystery to sit with, because the honest archaeological answer is, we're still not entirely sure. They may have held timber posts. They may have held early bluestones. Excavations have found cremated human remains associated with several of them, which tells us that from its very earliest phase, centuries before the famous stone circle existed, this site was already being used as a burial ground. That's a detail people often skip past, and it shouldn't be skipped, because it might be the single most important fact about Stonehenge. It functioned, for much of its history, as a cemetery. Cremated remains have been found across the site, and recent analysis suggests burials continued there for hundreds of years, both before and after the stone circle was raised. Some researchers, including Parker Pearson's team, have proposed that Stonehenge may have served as a monument to the dead, a permanent stone version of the ancestors, connected to a nearby wooden counterpart at Dyington Walls, just 2 miles away, associated with the living. That site has revealed the remains of a large Neolithic settlement, with evidence of huge feasts, seasonal gatherings, and timber circles of its own. The idea, still debated but well supported, is that people traveled to this area seasonally, feasted and lived in timber structures at Dyington, and used the permanent stone monument at Stonehenge to honor those who had died, wood for the temporary world of the living, stone for the enduring world of the dead. The solstice alignment is real, and it's the one piece of the story most people already know, but it's worth explaining properly because it's often oversimplified. On the summer solstice, the sun rises roughly in line with the heel stone, an outlying sarsen positioned outside the main circle, and its light travels down the monument's main axis. On the winter solstice, the alignment works in reverse. The sun sets along that same axis, viewed from inside the circle looking out. Excavations at Dyington Walls found evidence of large-scale feasting concentrated around midwinter, based on the age at which pigs were slaughtered, which strongly suggests the winter solstice, not the summer one, may have been the primary ceremonial event, a detail that runs counter to how Stonehenge tends to get portrayed in summer solstice tourism footage. Whether the monument tracked additional lunar or stellar events beyond this solar alignment is a subject of real, ongoing academic debate. Some archaeoastronomers argue for additional lunar alignments. Others are skeptical, pointing out that with enough stones and enough possible sightlines, some alignments will appear by chance. This is a genuinely contested area of the field, and any honest account has to say so. The acoustic question is also real, but again, deserves precision rather than exaggeration. In 2020, Researchers at the University of Salford built a scale acoustic model of Stonehenge as it may have looked when complete, and tested how sound behaved inside it. They found that the enclosed circle would have created noticeable acoustic effects, including echo and resonance, that could have made voices, music, or drumming inside the monument sound different than they would in open air, potentially amplifying a feeling of enclosure or intimacy for anyone standing within the stones. That's a legitimate and fascinating finding. It does not mean the monument was engineered as a mind-altering infrasound weapon, and no credible archaeological or acoustic research makes that claim. The honest version of the story is compelling enough on its own. A monument that shaped how sound felt to the people inside it, whether or not that was the builder's original intention. Around 1600 BCE, activity at Stonehenge tapered off. Some stones had already fallen or been removed by then. Others were left standing. There's no evidence of violent destruction, and no evidence of a dramatic, deliberate closing ceremony either. The popular idea that the last generation carefully preserved the site for a future civilization to decode is not something the archaeological record supports. What the evidence more plausibly shows is a long, slow decline in active use, consistent with gradual social and economic change across the Bronze Age, as Britain's centers of power and ritual activity shifted elsewhere. Mysterious decline, yes. Secret warning left for the future, no. That's a compelling narrative beat, but it isn't one the evidence backs up, and it's worth being honest about that distinction. So where does that leave us? With a monument that took roughly 15 centuries to build, incorporated stones from as far away as Scotland and Wales, doubled as one of the largest prehistoric cemeteries in Britain, aligned with real solstice events that were likely tied to seasonal gathering and feasting, and was constructed entirely using techniques, sledges, ropes, timber levers, organized labor, that experimental archaeology has shown to be physically achievable without lost technology, ancient visitors, or hidden mathematics beyond what real Neolithic astronomy and engineering could plausibly produce. The genuine mystery isn't some hidden code waiting for artificial intelligence to crack it. The genuine mystery is human. How did a society without writing, without metal tools, without wheeled transport suited to the terrain, organize itself across dozens of generations to move mountains, literally, for reasons connected to death, memory, and the sky? We don't have a single ancient voice explaining why they did it, and we probably never will. Neolithic Britain left no written records, so every explanation of purpose, memorial, temple, calendar, gathering place, is a reasoned interpretation built from physical evidence, not a certainty. That gap is uncomfortable, especially in an era where we're used to having answers to everything within seconds. But it's also honest. Stonehenge doesn't need an invented breakthrough to be extraordinary. The real story, quarries in Wales with stone wedges still wedged in the rock, a 6-ton stone hauled the length of Britain from Scotland, a cemetery that predates the famous stone circle by centuries, a settlement 2 miles away where people feasted before winter solstice, is already stranger and more human than anything a fabricated headline could invent. The people who built Stonehenge weren't primitive, and they weren't secretly advanced beyond recognition either. They were exactly as capable as the evidence shows. People who could plan across generations, coordinate labor at a massive scale, transport stone across hundreds of miles for reasons that mattered enough to justify the effort, and build something that has now outlasted every civilization that came after them by thousands of years. That's not a mystery that needs solving by artificial intelligence. That's a mystery that's been sitting in plain sight the entire time, one hole in a Welsh hillside at a time.